The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Great phrase of how the proof of anything you promise or anything you do, you can only discover when you actually um, live it, go through it. And that is exactly what we're going to do. Welcome today. My name is Jurgen Moors, a coach, consultant, and a strategic advisor. And welcome to this 30-day life challenge on entrepreneurship. And as I promised yesterday, and as we've been building up over the last 17 days, today we will actually look on a very specific, successful entrepreneurial project that I did in the past. Now, let's kick off with setting the scene a little bit, that you know what you're talking about, that you know a little bit about the project. And I specifically chose, uh, let's say the biggest project of my life, the pièce de la résistance, when I look at my successful entrepreneurship career, because it's the last one before I actually made the move towards becoming an entrepreneur, because it shows you the size that a project can take. And it also shows you what you actually can achieve, how much impact you can have in an organization. Now, let's go back a little bit. What was the scene? Where did we start? What's the context? I've been working for a chemical industry for more than 20 years, for a chemical company for more than 20 years. Um, it is a manufacturing site in Belgium, the company that I worked for, and headquarters were based in Germany. And so a lot of these decisions were made there. We had some local freedom as well. We had enough size so that we also had some central units on the premises, but we also had for a large part of the decisions we had to go towards Germany. Now we are in the period when I started the innovation and the project, the period 2015, 2018. So the middle of the hype in industry around Industry 4.0, everywhere you could find communications about it, reports about it. Every company wanted to talk about what they were doing in Industry 4.0. So there were a lot of use cases being trialed and experimented with without seeing the true business case at that point in time. And I just had taken over a unit that had been, yeah, underfinanced for a long time. So the reliability of the unit that I taken, or the utilities unit, was not there as it should. A lot of problems with assets. Everything was running at its limit. The time the general culture in the unit was rather negative and very conservative as well. And we were at the brink of a huge investment wave by business units on site. Meant they would also deploy more wastewater towards our wastewater treatment plant. They would use more steam. They would use more cooling water and stuff like that. So also an investment wave was coming towards my unit at the time. And that was a little bit where my project started. Because when I brought everything together, I saw a challenge, but also a huge opportunity. Um, you had this hype that you could surf upon. So there was the stars, like I said, were rightly oriented to start with something big. Um, because when I looked at it and I said to myself, how can I transform it? I definitely knew that I had to look at from, okay, what can I use and the in my benefit? And the benefit was, of course, the hype that I was talking about Industry 4.0, but also the investment wave that was coming. And this was something that I really wanted to capitalize upon at that point in time. Now, when I started my project, um, and when I took over the unit, one of the first things was, like we discussed in the past couple of weeks, is I started talking to my stakeholders. And my stakeholders were, for instance, my internal customers. What did they expect of us? How much additional capacity would they send us, or would they take off of us? What did they expect from reliability? And there you could normally see, because we're two large business units on site, a big difference between one business unit said from, okay, price is less important, but you need to be reliable, and the other one said, yeah, reliability we can live with, but your prices need to be a lot better. So there were really opposites that I had to work with. I also started talking to my boss, and he was also in this advantage. I started looking at my team, talking to my team, hearing about their thoughts and concerns. I would start talking to the central tech units, both in Antwerp but also in Germany, what they were looking at, what their questions were, where they were focusing on a couple of years. I was starting to look at external stakeholders and suppliers to look at, okay, what are they expecting, what are they going to do. And over the course of, let's say, half a year till a year, I brought together all of these aspects that I needed to tackle, and then moved towards a bold and large strategy where I said, look, I want to transform this unit over the period of 10 years' time, um, from the unit where it is right now, one of the least digital and automated units, till the most automated and digitized unit. Yeah. So that was my basic idea and my basic wish, my basic goal. And to do that, I want to capitalize on the one hand side, exactly the investment waves, because we would buy a lot of new equipment, we would install a lot of new assets. And on the other hand side, I would make it ready with the industry 4.0 topics, because that was for me a way to move forward. Now, how did I do that? Like I said, I talked to most of the thing, and so most of the units and most of the customers, and the most of the stakeholders, internal, external. And then I started to create a vision from, okay, how I'm going to tackle this, how are we going to do this, and there I said, from, okay, let's work on 2 or 3 time frames. We had the 10-year time frame, which was a long term. Then we had an in-between measurement that was a 5-year time frame, and then we had the first 2 years of the time frame. That was the basic time frame. And what we typically did was starting to map all of the technologies that were around and in this industry 4.0. 5G communication was in there, extended reality, robotics, and so on. So it was a whole cluster of technologies that you could find in there. And then we started to map from, okay, how important are these different technologies for us? How are the technologies positioned? Like, for instance, 5G at that point in time was very, very nascent, and there were no pilots running yet. So we knew, okay, this will only come after 5 years. And we started also to map from, okay, if we start in the third phase, meaning the phase between 5 and 10 years in the implementation, what are the things that we should look at that we do not threaten these implications? Yeah? Smart digital twins were also one of that. And what I mean with that is we look at 2 things. We looked at how can we avoid it in this third phase. We would spend too much money, meaning if we could buy a technology now or an asset now that was, for instance, 5G ready, we paid the extra bucks, the extra euros, and most of the time it was not that much, to make it 5G ready. So we knew when 5G then actually materializes in 5 years from now, our assets that by then will only be 3 to 4 years old, they will have at least have the 5G capability. That's one pre-investment that we did, and we knew, okay, the small additional investment in the beginning will pay off later. And we also started looking for, well, if we make a decision for one or a certain direction when it comes about automation or digitization, do we risk of not being able to capitalize on a technology that we see materialize in 5 to 10 years? So we also tried absolutely to avoid that, and that we would compromise this. That through a decision we would compromise something that would happen in 5 to 10 years. To give you an example from that, we were also in the process of installing a completely new digital system and steering the whole plant. We would go for an upgrade, and we could choose an upgrade that was rather basic, or we could choose for an upgrade that allowed us, at least in the future, to also work with signals and steer our installations based on a tablet approach. Okay, there was a lot of resistance to that, or to the basic idea itself. But if we make it cheap per decision, it would never be possible. So again, there we chose for the little more expensive version, so that at least we would have the choice if we wanted to to implement it for certain assets after 5 years. Now, um, how was I supported in this? Yeah, because I gathered with a lot of the ideas. I was supported by, of course, the 4.0 team because they were really happy to work with me because now suddenly there was somebody, but because typically they had the challenge to find operational people who would actually trial and error something and would also take part of the funding. Now they had a huge garden where they could experiment. So they were really happy from the central group in Germany, but same from the central group in Antwerp. Um, on top of that, my own boss and vice president, he gathered also a smaller group of his colleagues to have feedback sessions, challenge sessions in between before we actually came up with the final strategy. And we asked for a go ahead because basically our internal customers would pay for most of it through the pricing that we would do. And also from the outside, we looked at, okay, how can we shift resources here and there? That is just to give you um, how the project looked like. And then in 2018, we definitely got the go for the whole project from the whole site management team. And we would embark in this journey that would take us on a journey for more than 10 years. Now, if you look from before I'll tell you a little bit more about what are the exact successes that I've been in, let me tell you first from the successes that we had in realizing this strategy and getting it approved. And then after the first 2 years and after the 5 years and towards the 10 years, what are the key success factors that have played an enormous role? And one of the key factors was myself as an intrapreneur. Because it was not so that this was a question that was asked me to do this by my boss, nor was it a requirement centrally from anybody, nor from the organization. So it was my personal initiative to think really big, because that was what it was. It was thinking really big, really long term, and making it practical with steps in between. And it also meant for me a lot of resilience, adaptability, initiative, and putting the ego aside. Resilience, because the first couple of times when we discussed with the other vice presidents or we discussed certain topics, of course, people needed time to um, get acquainted with the idea. They needed to be able to look so far into the future and actually try to imagine what would happen and what was going on. So it took time. It took a lot of energy to convince them to go on that adaptable, because in this period of 5 years, for instance, and almost towards 10 years, the political and economical framework changed all the time, from having a lot of money to have almost no money. So I needed to be able to cope with that and still follow this strategy very, very strictly. All kinds of initiatives, because things were also failing sometimes, and we needed to add new initiatives because technologies moved as well. Putting aside ego meant, uh, sometimes it's not about you, but if somebody else takes a topic for you, and in this case, for instance, the central units took a lot of took certain topics. They experimented in my backyard, so to speak. Well, accept that then they are getting on stage and put your ego aside. That's also part of the game. Of course, spending some additional time to work yourself into certain topics, because a lot of the industry 4.0 topics I had heard about, I'd read about, I knew a lot, but the basics and what it could mean to my organization and how it would transform my organization, there I needed to spend additional time to understand that and really understand it. Also towards the technical side, from what would it mean to make technical decisions. So when you look at everything we talked about your growth mindset, well, it's absolutely the case. The business case approach, I refused to build for every technology and every use case that I had a business case. No, I created one huge business case for the whole transformation, coming up with this business case, how to design it, what to put in there, what not to put in there, and to sell it was also a huge learning curve for me. Of course, being continuously innovative, because ideas keep on coming and you need to push continuously people to be innovative, to put a lot of time and effort in communication of all kind, stakeholder management, your network, internal, external, because people move. managers move, VPs move, and yeah, you have to take the next one, the successor. You have to take them along on that path because they didn't have the first 2 years, or they didn't have the time when we were talking about the strategy. So you spent a lot of time as you is dependent on you. A lot of the success of such a lot impact project is dependent on you as the entrepreneur. It's not like something from I started it and now everything is running by itself. No, I had a lot of very good people who took a lot of the jobs out of my hands, but still it needed the pepper, the salt, the push, the enthusiasm all the time. Now, what else was one of the key success factors? Well, I started off by saying that I would like to surf the wave of Industry 4.0. But by doing this, by taking a risk, building this large project, and by onboarding external, internal partners that normally didn't have this playground to experiment, they started surfing the wave of enthusiasm and risk that they are not used to in a large organization as well. So, what are the key success factors is your own enthusiasm and your own risk taking creates a wave where others can join and surf on as well. Another key success factor in this case was because it was over such a long time period, persistence. Because you need to be on it every day. It needs to be a central topic, and it's not like it can be a central topic for 2 years and then diminish because then nothing will happen. So you need to have this on top of your mind, on top of everybody's mind for a very long time. That meaning for you as a person, it starts with persistence and then you can keep it. One of the other key success factors was because I was the operations manager of the unit, I had to a certain extent budget control. I had my own budgets and I could control and shift with them. And that helped, especially in the tougher years. I could shift my budget and redirect certain budgets. Even when I got budget cuts, top down, I could still prioritize my digitization strategy because you always have a certain amount to move and to prioritize. I prioritize it typically towards that aspect. And one other very important thing when you look at a key success factor is have everybody's back. All of your project manager, whether they report to you directly or not, when it's in a central team, when it's external company as a startup, for instance, have their back. If they're running a part of the project, a part of the solution for you, make sure if something goes wrong, you have their back. When they made a personal mistake, you still have their back in public and you can talk it out afterwards in private, but you have their back at all time. And when people see that, they also are very keen of taking the risks and surf for even bigger waves. But you need to have their back. They need to be able to count on you. That's what I learned from this project when I look back. Um, when I think about okay, how do you look at back when you talk about teamwork, about leadership, about problem solving? Yeah, then it's take the lead, lead by example, make it always a priority, and a whole lot of this stuff, right? Whether it's teamwork, whether it's leadership, whether it's problem solving, whether it's stakeholders, is about communication, communication, communication. You keep on giving the same messages all over everything you communicate, whether it's HR topics, whether it's reliability topics in some or another way, such a big project and the strategies behind it, you have to link it always. There's always a link to your bigger strategy, otherwise it doesn't work. And you need to talk about the problems that are there sometimes. But it also means, especially because you work with a lot of people, a lot of other people, that you sometimes need to be able to compromise. Meaning, as long as my overall goal and my overall vision was still attainable, the way we would get there was not so important to me. So I was ready to compromise on how to, but not where we wanted to go. That I never compromised on. Now, when we look back at okay, what was now the outcome? What was the result? And these were different aspects, well, both tangible and intangible. Like I said, it brought a huge wave of positiveness and of risk taking and of people wanting to join this effort from all units around us. But when I look at my unit myself, like I said, I had a very conservative, negative minded unit. So we needed to change the culture as well if I wanted to bring in a lot of change. without doing huge change programs. So I started something like a culture hacking program. And the culture hacking program meant that we would deliberately change a whole lot of stuff, smaller things, because for humans, it's easier to change everything or every day a small thing in their habits than a big thing. So I tried to change as much as I could, smaller things. Also because I knew the first 2 years we would implement a whole lot. We would build. The engineering phase were still going on. So before actually huge blocks of assets would become online on stream, it would take at least 2 to 3 years. So I needed to make sure that digital was also in those first 2 years somehow present if I wanted to my culture hacking program actually to work. So what I did in this first 2 years was bring on board all these smaller stuff. Like instead of paper, we started using tablets and smartphones. We looked at our work processes and started digitizing those work processes. We looked at bureaucracy that was inevitable if we could automate that. We did a lot of tests. I said we became the playground, the experimenting playground of a lot of units, meaning robots came and were tested. Technologies came like IoT sensors, tested and were developed together with us with the feedback from the people. So we experimented a whole lot also with 5G, with Wi-Fi, you name it. We were the playground of a lot of this experimentation. And that's the way that in the first 2 years, digitization was brought to all the people, because in some or other way, they could go and look how a robot worked, or they were in their direct efforts. They were affected by a certain decision. So this was something that we also did. But there's a huge but in this first 2 years, what we also did. We looked at all our work processes. We mapped all our work processes. And then we started to ask ourselves the question, the work that we're doing, do we have to do it? Could be that there was a regulatory framework that we had to do it. Is it a high value task or a low value task? If it is a low value task, do we have to do it? Can we not skip it? Can we not make it different? And that's the way how we stopped doing a lot of work that everybody was doing, because yeah, we've been doing this for 30 years. Nobody ever asked for it. It was how the structure grew, how everything grew. Now we start rationalizing so that just to avoid that we would digitize a task that was not necessary at all. So this was also very important to do that in those first 2 years, because it would affect how we would implement the digitization in the 8 years to come, and we would also avoid that way to do expensive investments in something that was not necessary at all. And that is how we actually worked those 2 years on changing, uh, on bringing tangible and intangible results and changing the culture. It's only after 2 years when larger units, assets came online on stream and started to function automatically, giving their data automatically, starting and stopping, automatic cleaning. Robots started to appear in our work processes. Simplification really started to take on. So in that period, the positive drive, the belief, the openness, and of course we had our problems because not everything worked on the first time. But there you could see that what we had built on our account in the first 2 years was money in the bank to move on in the years 3 to 5. And that's also when we saw that in those first years, if we made a small piece of money, it was just a couple of euros. It's only after 3, 4, 5 years when those larger units, those larger transitions were actually coming online and on stream, that we also got into the savings that were at a height of seven numbers. That was something that we did not have before. Now, this was just in my unit. Now, it reached further beyond that, because the unit became some kind of a beacon of how digitization and digital transformation can be done. People came and looked how the unit was doing that, and people were proud of their unit because we were doing that. How you could change a culture without a big transformation program, but working on it in a very typically new way. And one of the big things was that after a while, digital had become the new normal. Everybody looked at, yeah, can we do with digital? That at a certain point in time, I had to say from, yeah, but we don't have to digitize everything. Something that we do once every year, the question you should ask is, should I digitize that? Sometimes it's okay to do something in a way that is cheap, but just go and watch because you only have to be there once every year. So this is also something when you know that digital is the first priority of everybody in their job and it's the first thing they think about, then you know, okay, my program has been successful. Maybe I should look now that we get back to reality a little bit more. And you should not forget that in those 2 to 5 years that I was on board of the program and that we were working on this program, that we still had our our expansions that we were working on. We were doing our normal operations, and one of the things that I could show after 5 years to the people, for instance, was our unit. When you looked at the pure operational group, not the project people, because they came additionally, but they were only there for a very limited time. But our operational crew had not changed. But if I looked at my numbers in the output of our amount of product that we distributed, whether it was wastewater we took in, or steam, or condensate, or other types of waters, this had grown enormously. The budget in work, because if you build something, you also have a lot of work with it. The investment budget, the maintenance budget, the operational budget, all of them had grown and enormously. But we did it with the same amount of people with the same crew, and that showed to them is how much more efficiency we gained over that period of 5 years time, because we didn't add one fixed position in that whole time. Now, what are some key takeaways when you look at this story? And it's also to end this day about entrepreneurship. No matter how you look upon it, it is a chunk of work, and it's a lot of it's an additional job that you put yourself on. Um, the program or the project will not run by itself. You still need to be the present entrepreneur all the time, and you need to back your people. That's one of the key takeaways. I'm more than ever convinced when you talk about digital transformation that an holistic approach, like we tackled it, far outperforms any use case approach. Because in the use case, you look at one specific task or a small part of the process and on one use. The holistic approach tells you the whole picture. And it also avoids that certain digital technologies will start working against each other. You invest in both and they start working against each other. Where you look at it from an holistic approach, it is a lot more different. What also is a lesson that I learned, because I took the decision very deliberately, is not to come too soon to the front of the podium or on a stage, not with your management, but also not in general. I stayed for as long as I could out of attention. Why? Because I knew that once our successes would become clear, we would be hacked and we would need to spend time to come to this management meeting and talk about your successes. And can we now send this communication department to show and film you this and that? And I could keep us in the shadows for a very long time, but at a certain point in time, success became clear, and suddenly we had to spend additional time on that. Because when you let your ego play, of course you want to show your results, but then you are at a certain point in time doing nothing else anymore than showing results, and you don't have time to work on your project anymore. But why did I specifically pick this for today? Is that if you think big as an entrepreneur, and not as your first project. No, at a time where you said, okay, I have refined my skill set. I have done a lot of projects, smaller and bigger ones. And if you don't have the guts to really think big and say this will be my pièce de résistance, then you will accomplish more and have more impact, even in a large organization, than you can ever imagine yourself. So stop fooling around and telling yourself that in a large organization you cannot have impact. You can, if you think big and make sure that you have or you master the skill set of a true successful entrepreneur. And with that message, I'd like to close today this 30-day live stream about entrepreneurship. And I urge you, when you think about what for you in your job, in your position right now as an entrepreneur, what could for you be, when you think really big, a pièce de la résistance for you in a transformation or for your business unit or for a customer or for a product, think about that. Really have the guts to think big and then wonder, why should that not be possible? And then wonder, what am I missing now? What part of that skill set of an entrepreneur am I missing? And with that, I'd like to see you tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to talk more about overcoming challenges. And a lot of the things that I discussed today, you will see they return tomorrow when we talk about overcoming challenges. Thank you very much and see you tomorrow. Bye bye.